All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Goreski, and I'll be your host for today. This week, we are exploring climate change. So it's climate change in New York City. There's world leaders and dignitaries gathered from all over the world, and this will be one of the hot topic issues. And we have a whole week of events with scientists and explorers and researchers who are looking at climate change, looking at what's happening around the world, documenting those stories. And then, of course, many of them are looking to solutions for the issues that we are facing. So we are teamed up with the Explorers Club for these live events over the next week. If you visit our website under the events, you can find all the climate events that we do have coming up, ranging from polar bears to coral reefs to sea ice melting in the Arctic. We have a lot going on this week. All right, well, let us get right down to business and let's bring in our guest for today. Today we have Dr. Jessie Creamean. She is an atmospheric scientist at Colorado State University. So she studies tiny specks of material in the air called aerosols. These become airborne from things like plants and soil and the ocean. And she recently returned from the ARTofMELT expedition to the Arctic. So working out on the sea ice and trying to determine how cloud formation in polar regions is being impacted by climate change. And this is just one of several Arctic expeditions in the last 7 years that she's been on. And we've been lucky enough to connect with her on a few of those other expeditions. So let's bring Jessie in right now. Hey, Jessie, how are you?
Hey, Joe. Good. How are you?
Good. Good to have you with us today and kicking off our Climate Week events. And in fact, you will also appear again for the classrooms who are using our daily dive. We have a two-parter with you coming up. So we're looking forward to premiering that the next few days as well.
Yes, definitely. Excited to talk about the expedition that I was on.
All right. Well, we will let you take over for a little bit, Jessie. And then afterwards, maybe we'll play some Kahoot and we'll get into some Q&A action.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Let me share my screen. Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. As Joe had mentioned, I was just on an Arctic expedition on a ship in the Arctic Ocean. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of what we were doing up there, why we were up there, and what it's like to be a scientist up on a ship in the Arctic. So as Joe said, I'm Dr. Jessie Creamean. I am an atmospheric research scientist, and I've been working in Colorado since late 2012. I am at Colorado State, which is the mascot is the Rams. Woo, go Rams. But before this, I had to get 3 different degrees in chemistry. So I went to college in Illinois, and then I went to graduate school in California. The thing I've discovered since starting to become a scientist is that I really love doing research in cold places. Anywhere there's snow, there's ice, there's ocean water. I've even done research in the Swiss Alps really high where there's a lot of ice. Anywhere it's cold, I absolutely love to do research there. And over the last 7 or so years, I've participated in 9 Arctic expeditions or deployments. And so here's some pictures just kind of showing what it looks like when I'm personally in the Arctic. So you can see I'm pretty excited in quite a few of these photos. And I have to mention that I have 2 wonderful golden retrievers named Whiskey and Montana. I get sad when I have to leave them to go on my expeditions, but they're super happy when I come home and I get to explore Colorado mountains with them. All right, so this is a map of the Arctic. It doesn't show the sea ice, but it's showing you the locations that I've been on those 9 different expeditions. So you're going to see a lot of words you probably aren't familiar with. Don't worry about it too much. Those are just the names of the different places or the expeditions I've been on. The squiggly lines are showing the tracks that the ships or the icebreakers that I've been on have gone to. And so this yellow one here called ARTofMELT is the one that I'll be talking to you today about. Okay, so as Joe mentioned, I study things called aerosols. These are tiny specks of material in the air that come from things on the land. And so they have a really important role in climate, but it really depends on what they are, how many of them there are in the air, and how big they are. And so certain types of aerosols act like little mirrors in the atmosphere, and they can scatter sunlight back to space. So these would be aerosols like sea salt from the ocean. Now, there are other types of aerosols that actually act kind of like a blanket in Earth's atmosphere, and they can absorb heat from the sunlight. So this would be things like that black soot that you see coming from cars and trucks and fires. Now, a very small population of aerosols have really unique properties, and that they act like seeds for cloud formation. So cloud droplets and ice crystals basically kind of act like plants where they need these seeds to grow and to form the clouds that you see in the sky above. And so these can be things like pollution or sea salt that are really good at forming cloud droplets. And then some clouds, when they're cold enough, contain ice. And those ice crystals can be formed on things like microbes, such as bacteria from plants, or dust from deserts or agriculture. And so these clouds can then scatter sunlight back to space, or they can actually trap heat into Earth's atmosphere as well. So how does this type of process apply to the polar regions? So in the Arctic, we have a really unique surface. So there's ocean, there's sea ice, and there's different types of microbes that live in these different types of surfaces. So we have bacteria and algae that can live in the ocean waters. There's also bacteria and algae that live in the sea ice. And these different types of microbes can actually emit materials into the air. And these materials, if they get high enough, again, they can form those clouds. And those clouds can either scatter sunlight or they can trap sunlight and heat into the Earth's atmosphere. And so this is really important in the Arctic because these clouds can really impact the amount of energy reaching the sea ice and thus the temperature of the sea ice. So as you probably heard, the ice is melting really quickly in the Arctic. And so we're trying to understand how these things work to be able to predict how much it might melt in the future. And that was kind of a central focus of this expedition I was on. So it was called ARTofMELT, and basically that stands for Atmospheric Rivers and the Onset of Sea Ice Melt. What that means is atmospheric rivers are these storms that make their way up into the Arctic. They have a lot of really warm air, a lot of water in the air, and they can help melt the sea ice. And so we were there studying those processes. On this map here, you can kind of see a squiggly line that's colored with some dots. That's generally where we were on the icebreaker Odin, which is a Swedish ship about 300 feet long. Showing a zoom in of that area. So this is kind of what our ship track looks like. And the reason why it looks a little crazy is because we were in sea ice. So this ship will break through a couple meters, which is like 6 feet of sea ice. And so we move really slow and the sea ice causes us to move in all kinds of weird directions. But this is where the ship went, was the squiggly line. And then these dots where we collected measurements on the sea ice. So we took a helicopter out with a team of scientists and we would do all kinds of measurements. So I'll talk about what exactly we did here on the ice in a little bit. So this is a picture of the ice-breaking ship. So this is called the Odin. You can see it in port before we left. This is what it looks like. And this is what we lived on for about 7 weeks earlier this summer in May and June. This is kind of what it looks like to live on one of these ice-breaking ships. So on the top left here, you can see our dining hall. That's where we eat our meals and we socialize. On the bottom, you can see the gym. And yes, there's a gym on an icebreaker. We find time to try to exercise and have fun when we can, when we're not working hard doing our scientific measurements. On the bottom right, you can see a lounge area where we would play games and drink coffee and tea. And then on the upper right, that's me in front of my room. So you can see that we live in these really small quarters and bunk beds with other scientists, but we're not really in our rooms too much. We're really out on the ship or on the ice doing work or having fun and trying to relax in the meantime. We had a lot of different people that were involved in the expedition. So these pictures are showing you approximately 40 researchers from all kinds of different countries and universities that were a part of the expedition. Here's a picture of us actually during the expedition. We all had matching hats and matching sweaters that had our expedition logo on it. So it was really fun. It was a great group of people and we really had a good time working hard and having fun out there. So this is what the Arctic looks like during the time of year that we were there. So we were there in May into June. And so this is where the ice starts to break up a little bit. You can see the Odin ship right in the middle of the picture there. On the top behind the text, you can actually see a balloon that we flew with all kinds of instruments on it. But you can see the ice. some of it's kind of a big solid piece. And then on the bottom left, you can see it's kind of a mosaic of different tiles. So this is the ice and how it breaks up and it starts to melt from these open water areas in the summer in this time period. All right, so of course we see all kinds of cool animals, but this expedition in particular, we saw 31 polar bears. So I'll just show you a video that one of the crew members took on a drone of one of our polar bear visitors during the expedition. So this is kind of the on ice camp that we had. The polar bears can smell us from a long ways away. So you can see this big fella here. He's getting pretty close to the ship. When we have a polar bear in the area, there are no scientists on the ice. We want to be nice and safe, and we want the polar bears to remain safe as well. So we're mostly on the ship watching the polar bears, and you can see that with our flags to mark where our locations for our measurements are, and you'll see in a little bit here, they like to play. They think these flags and these scientific equipment are actually toys. So this was one of our big visitors that we had. But you can kind of get an idea of the landscape that we observed, the curiosity of the polar bears. He's sticking his tongue out because it's kind of, he's like, what's going on here? What is this ship full of all kinds of people? Here he is, curious about one of our snow machines. So some of the equipment we have for scientific measurements on the ice are really heavy. So we have to use these carts on snow machines. And this particular polar bear was very, very curious about some of the snow machines and some of the scientific equipment on the ice. They look pretty cute, but I wouldn't want to run into one of them on the ice. So there he is digging in one of the holes that we actually made in the ice, but he thinks it's a hole that a seal made. So seals will often make holes in the ice. They're called breathing holes. And this is where the polar bears try to get a nice tasty snack of a seal. So you can imagine there's lots of videos of polar bears from the expedition since we saw 31 of them. But now on to some of the science. So what kind of science did my team particularly do? These are just some pictures of all the different types of things that we were doing out there. So we had measurements of air, of different aerosol properties on the ship. We had instruments that were on this balloon. We had instruments that hovered below the helicopter to measure different aerosols and different air properties outside of the ship. We also had little packages that we would put on the ice that took different types of measurements. You can see on the bottom or the bottom right, that's a plot of one of my packages of aerosol instruments, and it also had my little mascot that I like to bring out. We also took water samples, we took snow samples and ice samples, all kinds of cool stuff. So we care about what's in the air, but a lot of what's in the air comes from the ocean and the snow and the ice. So we were collecting samples of ice. You can see on the top left here, there's an ice core that we collected. So we actually take this type of equipment and we core down into the ice. So it kind of looks like a big candy cane, but with a barrel. And what we do is we take a drill, we'll pull an ice core out with this special tool, and we'll take all types of measurements of it. And then we also take samples back home so we can do more advanced measurements back in our laboratories. Here's some other pictures of some of our team members collecting seawater samples. We collected snow samples. On the bottom left here, you can see some containers full of seawater and sea ice. And you'll see on the right, there's a clear bottle. So that's pretty much what mostly the seawater looks like. But what's interesting about this time of year is there's a lot of biology that starts to happen in the water. So those sea ice and marine algae and bacteria that I was talking about earlier, the sunlight starts to come out now and it starts to get warmer. So they start to become more active. And so on the bottom left here, this cloudy bottle is showing seawater that we collected where there was some algae. So you can really see that there's a lot of stuff in the water. And these are all kinds of different little microbes. However, sometimes when we would access our remote sites from helicopter, we would have visitors like the polar bears. So we'd have to go in the helicopter and go back to the ship. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video from one of our remote stations. So this is where we take a helicopter out with a bunch of equipment. We take all those samples that I was just talking about. And then I would also take a GoPro and basically connected it to a piece of rope and put it into where we would core for ice. So I'll show you an example of what that looks like and what it actually looks like on the bottom of the sea ice.
All right, we're going to attempt to put the GoPro down our ice core hole. We'll see if we see anything or if I leave this in the bottom of the ocean. All right, see you all later.
So that's going through the ice and voila, we're on the bottom of the ice. So it's not smooth like an ice cube like you would think. There's all kinds of different terrain. And that's because the sea ice is always moving in the Arctic. And so what happens is when you have this big, huge thing of sea ice moving across the top of the world, is it will break apart, it crunches back into itself. So you get these features that form on the bottom of the ice because it's always moving. You also get all kinds of different dimples, it looks like. It's just a really, really cool, unique environment that you might not expect, and really pretty blues. Okay, so that's what under the ice looked like at the very beginning of our expedition. But towards the end, when we started doing more remote stations via helicopter, and once the biology started waking up, it went from this to this. So all of that green stuff, that's all algae and bacteria. There are all kinds of little tiny, tiny microscopic shrimp and all kinds of little animals that are causing this green color. And so you think of this stuff kind of like plants, like they grow as the summer, as we get into the summer period. So we went from that really clear, pretty blue that we could see everything to basically this. But even though it's not as pretty of a video, it's really cool for a scientist because, you know, part of what I showed before is that these types of microbes can emit materials into the air that can help clouds form. And so as a scientist, for me studying that, seeing this cloudy green was actually really cool because there's a lot of microbes in the water that we were there to study. So we have a lot of work to do. On the expedition, we've only been back for about 2 months. And so myself and some of my team members, some of the students that we brought with, they're busy in lab analyzing these samples to look at what types of microbes are in them and how they might be effective at helping clouds form in the Arctic. So we do all kinds of measurements in the lab. So stay tuned. Hopefully, you know, within a year or so, we'll have a lot of cool measurements that give us some information on what these microbes are and how they're important for Arctic clouds. If you want to learn more about this expedition, also past expeditions I've been on, you can go to my website, which is provided here. I've been a little late. I normally write field blogs for people like you guys to read. But I'm a little late on this latest expeditions, but you can see some from my previous Arctic field work, and I hope to have some blogs, so giving some more information on what life was like in the Arctic, hopefully within the next couple months. So with that, I will end my slides, and I would be happy to take any questions.
All right, Jessie, thank you so much for taking us on the Art of Melt expedition. It looks like it was a lot of fun. You had a lot of good company, including those polar bears. That would have been really fun to see the polar bears checking out your equipment and stuff. All right. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to play a quick round of Kahoot. We're going to see how well our students were paying attention. Now, I'm going to share my screen, and that's going to bring the Kahoot up front and center. And then there's a few different ways that you could take part. One is if you have one-to-one technology at your seat, that's awesome. You could join that way. If not, I know some classrooms don't, you can join as a class. So your teacher could put up at the front of the room and you could shout out your answers to him or her. If you aren't able to load up the Kahoot, that's no big deal at all. You can instead just shout out your answers and see how you do at the end. So we'll let a few classes come in here and join us. You can see the link at the top is kahoot.it, and then you can see that it's going to ask you for a PIN number, and that PIN number is there front and center, 1082352. And then you'll get your class will get an animal name, like we've got the silver meerkat there, the social egret, the blue falcon, There's going to be 4 questions today. You will have 20 seconds for each question. There's some true and false, and then there is some multiple choice as well. The quicker you get your right answer in, the more points you're going to get. And remember, this is just for fun, and we'll see who was very nice and speedy quick today. So let's get it going, because I want to make sure that there's lots of time for some Q&A action with those who are joining us. So let's start our Kahoot. Okay. So first question coming up. Aerosols come from plants, the ocean, soil, or all of the above? You have a few more seconds to get that right answer in. Aerosols come from plants, soil, the ocean, or all of the above. All right. Most went with all of the above. Let's see. That puts our Blue Falcon crew in first place. Let's jump on to our next question. Aerosols like sea salt can reflect sunlight back into space. Is that true or is that false? Aerosols like sea salt can reflect sunlight back into space. Okay, good job, crew. That is true. That puts the Silver Meerkat in first place. Let's go to our third question. What was Jessie's expedition called? Was it Polar Wind, Arctic Explorer, ARTofMELT, or Polar Bear Searcher? Got a few more seconds to get your answer in. All right. ARTofMELT is absolutely correct. Blue Falcon on a streak in top spot. Our next question, how many polar bears did they see on the expedition? Was it 3, 11, 20, or 31? Got a few more seconds to get that answer in. I'd be happy just to see 1. But in fact, they saw 31. Pretty awesome. All right, final question. It is a true or false. Polar bears can only smell things that are really close by. Is that true or is that false? They can only smell things that are really close by. Okay, that's right. That is false. They can smell from great distances, which is why I'm sure they were so interested in your ship with all those great smells coming off of your gear and the ship. That puts the Silver Meerkat in third place, the Creative Hen in second, and in first place we have the Blue Falcon. All right, crew, thank you so much for playing a little bit of Kahoot action with us today. Let's get on to some of our questions. So if you're tuning in via YouTube, you can use the chat to send in some questions as well. We have some classrooms joining us in camera spots. We'll take their questions live. So let me just shut down the Kahoot on my end so the music will stop. There we go. And let's get into it. So George Webster joining us.
So I wanted to ask, do you want to find a formula to stop all the green stuff in the water?
Do I want to find a formula for what, all the green stuff?
To like stop the green stuff from like melting the ice, right?
So the green stuff actually was coming from a lot of the ice. So what happens in the ice in the Arctic in the winter is a lot of these microbes are basically kind of hibernating. And as the summer starts up, the ice starts to melt and then the microbes get released into the water. And so these microbes are like, oh, I'm awake now. And now they're like, oh, we need to multiply, we need to eat, and we need to live our lives for the summertime period. So it's actually a good thing to see those microbes coming from the ice.
Yeah, they form a really important part of the food chain as well in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
All right.
Next question.
Hi. Are you planning to post any future expeditions on your website?
Yes. So I will post some vlogs from this expedition. And then we're also going to be, so I don't just work in the Arctic, I also work in the Antarctic.
Oh.
So we have some ships going into the southern part of the world in what's called the Southern Ocean. And so there we're trying to understand the same things, but in a different part of the world that's even farther away from people. So we will have some more information on those studies as well on my website.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. We'll try to post more.
All right.
Hi. My question is, so okay. So basically, you know the bottom of the sea, the bottom of the snow. So how is the blue stuff formed, and is it like underground or is it like in the sea?
The blue stuff. So on the bottom of the ice, are you talking about how it looked really blue, like really cool blue colors? Yeah, that's actually just how the light goes through the sea ice. So the sea ice on the top, it looks like a solid snow-covered surface. But then as you go under, there's still some sunlight that gets through the ice. So it reflects off of it and makes these really cool, pretty blue colors.
Oh, okay. I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. I had a question. You know how Antarctica is far away? Okay. Didn't you guys get seasick and stuff?
Yeah, so we left when we left land, we were still in open water until we got up to the sea ice. It was a little rough at times. The boat kind of just rocks back and forth, and there were some people that had to take seasickness medication. So it does happen.
Thank you.
All right, grade sixes, I promise I'll come back to you shortly, but I do want to visit. We have got some third graders in Illinois. So I want to make sure we get in some of their questions. They look excited. There they are. Hi, everyone.
Third graders, they can't hear the questions if you're so excited that you can't quiet down. So Luke, go on ahead.
I got a question. Are clouds really important?
Yes, they are. So clouds everywhere in the world are important because that's where we get our rain and snow from. And that's also, if you think of clouds kind of like, they can reflect sunlight and they can trap heat in the Earth's surface. So they're really important for regulating the temperature on the planet. They're especially important in the Arctic because they can regulate the temperature over these frozen surfaces. So like the sea ice and snow. And so they're important because those things are going away pretty quickly because of climate change. And we don't quite understand how much the clouds are really helpful in that. So do they help cool them more? Do they help melt the surface? There's all kinds of things that we really don't understand about the clouds. And that's why people like me go up there to try to see how these clouds are important for the melting ice.
Okay.
Hey, do we have another question, Joe?
Oh, yeah, go for it. You can ask. I see you put lots in the chat. So come on up and ask, lots.
Joanna, please. Thank you.
Were there any people living there?
So where we left from, which is an island nation called Svalbard, it's a really tiny island that's up in the Arctic. And there are people that do live there. So there's a lot of ships that are for science that leave there. There's people that live there for hunting. There's people that live there to support tourism. So there's actually cruise ships that go up to Svalbard. So there are people that live there, but once we're out on the ship on the Arctic Ocean, nobody lives out there. It's completely away from people.
Everyone, please be seated. Okay, thank you. And Samantha? Samantha's next.
Can I be the next?
Samantha's next. I'm calling people who gave me cards, okay?
Why do clouds form?
Why do clouds form? So they form because there's, you know how when it's really hot in Illinois in the summer, it feels wet, the air feels sticky? Yeah? So that's because there's a lot of water in the air, but you just can't see it really well. So we need water in the air. And then these aerosols that I talked about, you know how sometimes when you take a shower and there's steam that builds up and collects on the mirror and it makes it foggy? That's kind of how aerosols work in the air. So they're just on a much smaller scale. So water will condense on them, and then they grow into these big particles or these big droplets. And sometimes they form ice if it's cold enough. And so those clouds will form when you have the right mixture of aerosols and water, and you have to have the right directions that the air is moving to form the clouds too.
All right, let's get one more, but we'll come back. But let's get one more for now. Then we'll see if there's some YouTube questions.
Oh, we have as many questions as you can answer. Lily, come on. Room full of questions. Lily, come on up.
How fast does the ice melt?
How fast? It depends on the year. So, it can melt. There's usually a transition period of about a couple days and where you'll actually visually see the ice melting. So we measured the temperature of the ice for the whole expedition, and we took visual observations, and we could see that the ice was slowly getting to the point where it would start to melt. So at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Because that's where ice forms from water, right? Yeah, or melts, yeah. So yeah, it can happen pretty quickly. The Arctic, the whole part of the ice in the Arctic is melting faster than we can predict. So we're trying to understand why that is. And so there are scientists like myself who predict these things in the future. And some scientists think that the ice could be completely melted and gone in the summer by the year 2050. So there would be no ice in the Arctic in the summer. Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
All right, we're gonna come back your way for a few more. Okay, I promise. Yeah. All right, and we don't want that. That sea ice melting would not be good for all of those animals that live in the Arctic, like the seals and the polar bears that really need that sea ice. So that would not be a good thing if we lost all of our sea ice. Okay. While you were on the sea ice, did you find any other evidence of human activity, like microplastics or plastics or things like that?
We didn't see anything visually. We didn't have anyone on our expedition looking at microplastics, but the Mosaic expedition I was on a few years ago, which was a year in the Arctic, there were people looking at microplastics. And so they have to do special measurements to be able to find those. And they were seeing that there are evidence of different microplastics up in the Arctic, unfortunately.
Okay. One more here from YouTube, and then we'll visit our classes again. Pollutants. Are pollutants in the air leading to more clouds forming?
That's a good question. They certainly can. So pollutants from where people live can actually be transported. So the air can bring these pollutants up to the Arctic. And we do measure those. We do see pollutants coming from places like cities. We see it coming from fires in remote areas from land. And these pollutants do have a lot of aerosols in them. And those aerosols can certainly help the clouds form in the Arctic.
Okay. I know there's some more questions from our grade 6s because we had a lineup at the camera. Let's see if they still have a couple more questions for us.
Hi. My question is, why did you call it the exploring by the seat of your pants?
So that's more of a question for me. So there's a saying called flying by the seat of your pants. That's where you kind of do something without planning. You just kind of jump into it. And so that's one reason why we call it exploring by the seat of your pants, because we kind of just make up what we do as we go along. But also, we can take classrooms anywhere in the world and they never have to leave their seat. So exploring by the seat of your pants is kind of those two reasons there. We can take classrooms anywhere in the world, and also that we kind of just make things up as we go along and have a lot of fun doing it. So that's where that name came from.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, wait. Hi, guys. Hi.
Hi.
So my question is that, did you guys see any baby polar bears?
Oh, we did actually. I should have showed pictures of them, but we saw, I don't know how many, but there was a couple mama and single cub polar bears that would come walking by our ship. And then there was at one point we had a mama and 2 cubs, which that's pretty rare to see. And it was really cute. The 2 cubs were playing with the flags and they were fighting on the ice. It was awesome. They're really cool to see.
Very, very cool. We have one more there. We can squeeze in one more, then we'll check in with our Illinois crew.
So now I understand. So are you trying to find a formula to stop the ice from melting?
Finding a formula, kind of. So we are studying all types of different things that affect the melt of the ice. And those things that we study, the measurements, do eventually go into formulas in models. So we have climate models and weather models that basically tell us, they kind of mimic what happens in the real world. And then once they're good enough, they can tell us what might happen in the future. And so what we measure can go into formulas that go into these models that say, oh, this is what the weather's going to be like in a week, or, oh, this is when the sea ice is going to melt. So yeah, that's a very good question. A lot of what we do does go into formulas eventually.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, grade 6s. Very cool questions. I have a feeling if we visit these grade 3s that they might have a couple more questions.
Yeah. I'm calling Natalie up. Natalie, you here? There you go. Natalie, go ahead. Go down so you can see your face on the screen, Natalie. There you go.
How many different types of animals did you see?
Different types. So we saw polar bears. We saw seals. They often, when we would be out on our helicopter stations, we would be by open water. And so all of a sudden you would see this little seal head pop up and he'd be like, hey, what are you doing? And then they would go back down in the water. And then he would get closer and he'd be like, hey, what are you doing? And he would go back down in the water. So they were very curious about what we were doing. So we definitely saw seals. We saw all kinds of birds. So there are different types of birds that actually live up in the Arctic and they eat things like fish. So we saw tiny little fish that were there too in the water. And those animals all feed on all that green stuff that I showed. So as Joe was saying, that green stuff is what feeds the tiny little fish that feed the tiny little birds that feed the bigger birds that feed the seal. So it's a really important part of the food chain. But yeah, we saw everything from algae to fish to seals to birds to polar bears.
Thank you. We're going to call Sophia. Sophia, here you go. Here's your question.
Are the animals okay?
Are they okay? Ooh, that's a good question. It's a tough one. They seem to be doing okay, but as Joe is saying, with the sea ice melting and with it not growing back as much as it should in the winter, it's less habitats and less homes for these animals. So they're having to change because of a changing climate and because the sea ice is changing. So they seem to be adapting all right, but we'll see what happens in the future.
Okay, next is Daniela. Daniela. I need to have you.
How did you get under the ice?
Well, the video I showed is from, you know what a GoPro is?
Yeah, I did.
It's a little camera that is waterproof. And so I would tie that on to some rope, and then I would actually basically fish with the camera. So we would have those holes that we made with some of our equipment to collect ice samples. And I would send this tiny little camera down that hole so we could see the bottom of the ice. And I did that every time we went out. We didn't go in the water. It's very, very cold. But there have been Arctic expeditions where you have to wear a really, really thick wetsuit. And then there are divers that sometimes go under the water to do different types of scientific measurements. So it can happen, but not very often. It's very, very cold water.
All right, let's grab one more question before we sign off for today.
No, Bianca was next. I took her off and then she's back again.
Did you see any animals that eating each other?
We did not. I don't know if I want to see that, but no, we mostly saw them. The polar bears were just mostly walking around. They were looking for food. So like that one video I showed where the polar bear was looking in the hole that we made in the ice, he was looking for a seal to eat. So they definitely eat them up there. We didn't see it, but yep, that definitely happens.
Yeah, polar bears are messy eaters and they don't know when they're going to eat next. So they gulp down so much food. I bet you more food than some of you guys weigh. They'll put it in their tummy at one time because they just don't know when they're going to get their food next.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty messy eaters.
Messy.
All right. Well, let's, before we sign off for today, let me bring our grade 6 crew in here front and center as well. Thank you so much, classrooms, for being with us today. Thank you for playing Kahoot. Thank you for your awesome questions. It was great to have you. Dr. Jessie, as always, thank you so much for having us and taking us on the Art of Melt expedition. And we can't wait for your next one. Because hopefully we'll get lucky and we can come along and do some from the ship. That would be really cool.
Yes, definitely. Cool.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me, Joe.
All right. We're going to sign off for today. Thanks so much, everyone. All right.